A farmer's son was secretly building a gun. That boy was Mikhail Kalashnikov. Even as a kid, he had a thing for weapons. He made a shotgun out of metal pipes and a wooden handle. But when he tried to test it on a chicken, his dad caught him and took the gun away right away.
Что там у тебя? Давай, показывай. Опять смастерил.
Где?
The scene shifts to 1941, during World War II, when fierce battles raged between the Soviet Union and Germany. By then, Kalashnikov had grown up and served as a tank operator with the rank of senior sergeant. But the Germans had far more advanced weapons, and one by one, Soviet tanks were destroyed. Under heavy fire, Kalashnikov kept fighting, trying to hold his ground until he had no choice but to push forward and risk his own life. Kalashnikov was hit in the shoulder and woke up at a camp. His injury made it impossible for him to keep fighting, so he was sent to a hospital along with other wounded soldiers. On the way, they crossed paths with another unit heading to the front lines. A captain there warned Lieutenant Johann to stay alert. German soldiers were still everywhere. Not long after, the truck carrying Kalashnikov got stuck in the mud. Everyone jumped out to help push, but no matter how hard they tried, the vehicle wouldn't move. Kalashnikov then suggested finding a horse in a nearby village, and Lieutenant Johann agreed. He grabbed his weapon, just in case things went wrong. On the way, Kalashnikov asked about the gun Johann was carrying, a model he had never seen before. Johann explained it was a new automatic rifle still being tested. As they got close to the village, Johann handed Kalashnikov a pistol and told him to stay back and keep watch. And sure enough, there was a horse there. But just as Johann approached the owner's house, suddenly, luckily, Johann survived, and with the help of the horse's owner, they both made it back safely. On the way, Kalashnikov, still curious, took apart the jammed weapon and discovered the problem: water had gotten inside, and the spring was far too weak. Johann couldn't believe it, and asked how Kalashnikov knew so much about guns. Kalashnikov simply replied that he'd tried making one before. Once the truck was finally freed from the mud, they continued their trip to the hospital. Kalashnikov stayed there for quite some time. His shoulder injury was serious. In late 1941, he was granted leave and sent back to his village to recover. On the train, Kalashnikov shared a carriage with other wounded soldiers. There, he met a soldier from Kazakhstan, and the two started talking. Kalashnikov told him he once worked as a mechanic at a railway station in Kazakhstan, until he got fired for secretly building a homemade shotgun in the workshop. He also shared that while recovering in the hospital, he had already started designing a new automatic weapon, one that he believed could match the Germans' advanced guns. The Kazakh soldier loved the idea and encouraged him to finish what he started. That support fired Kalashnikov up. When the train reached Matai station, he got off and went straight to the old railway depot where he used to work. There, he met the depot owner, Pavel, and explained his plan to build a new automatic rifle together. But Pavel refused the last time Kalashnikov's homemade gun was discovered by the police. Pavel ended up detained for 2 days.
Вот что если нам взять и здесь прямо в депо изобрести этот автомат?
Это ж ты мастерил свой самопал на рабочем месте.
Так точно, я.
Когда твой хренов самопал нашли у меня в цеху, 2 дня из меня следователь душу вынимал.
Kalashnikov was ready to give up and go home, but then a high-ranking officer stepped off the train. Seizing the chance, Kalashnikov approached Colonel Basarov and laid out his idea and blueprints for an automatic rifle. He argued, confidently, that his design could change the game. So far, the Soviet forces were losing out to German automatic weapons that could fire dozens of rounds in seconds. Impressed, the colonel gave him a written recommendation on the spot, clearing the way for Kalashnikov to use Pavel's factory. Pavel couldn't refuse after that. He immediately called his men and ordered the workshop and tools to be readied for Kalashnikov.
Саныч, сейчас подойдет к тебе такой Калашников. Выдели ему там угол. Да. 100 верстак инструмент.
Because working with only one arm was extremely difficult, Kalashnikov went to Pavel and asked for a few workers to assist him, but Pavel refused. All of the workers were already busy with their own tasks, and in Pavel's view, allowing Kalashnikov to use the workshop in the first place was already more than enough. Even so, Kalashnikov didn't give up. He continued trying to bring his design to life, working with just one good arm. Then, one day, several workers came to him on their own, offering to help. Kalashnikov was genuinely grateful, because each of them was highly skilled in their respective trades. They began helping him after regular work hours, shaping each part of the weapon carefully and precisely. Piece by piece, the rifle took form, until finally, Kalashnikov completed the first prototype of his automatic firearm. Without wasting any time, they tested it, with several workers gathering around to watch.
Жень, давай!
Давай!
The next day, Kalashnikov traveled to Alma-Ata to meet Colonel Basarov. But Basarov was already at the front lines, and someone new had taken his place. Kalashnikov asked to speak with the new colonel and showed the automatic rifle he had designed. Instead of listening, the officers there grew suspicious and quickly escorted him to another room. A short while later, another officer arrived. The guard showed him the rifle Kalashnikov had brought. The officer examined it and immediately realized that it wasn't factory-made. The design was something new and unusual. He then decided to take the weapon to be evaluated by a firearms specialist named Andrei Ivanovich. When the weapon was tested, they immediately noticed that its internal mechanism was different from the others, and what surprised them most was its accuracy, which was noticeably better than the automatic rifles they were currently developing. Kalashnikov was released and immediately brought to meet Ivanovich. During their discussion, Ivanovich explained that he would take Kalashnikov's rifle as a sample to General Kropotkin, the commander of the Central Asian District. If the general approved, Kalashnikov would be allowed to enter the National Soviet Rifle Design Competition, and if he won, his weapon would be produced on a large scale. Ivanovich also offered to help improve the rifle's accuracy and assist in refining its overall design. Soon after, the general and several officers arrived to test Kalashnikov's rifle themselves. They tried it in both automatic mode and single-shot mode, and the general was genuinely impressed with its performance and accuracy. In the end, the general decided to issue a personal recommendation letter, allowing Kalashnikov to enter the National Rifle Design Competition as the representative of the Turkmenistan district.
На всесоюзный конкурс поедешь от нашего военного округа. Письмо тебе дам с личной рекомендацией.
In 1943, Kalashnikov arrived at the Kremlin in Moscow and was directed by a major to the Central Weapons Design Bureau. On the way, he met a well-known firearms designer, Major Alexei Sudayev, who was also competing in the national rifle competition. The two of them bonded quickly, and Alexei even joked that whoever lost the competition would owe the other a round of beer. When Kalashnikov finally presented himself to the overseeing major, there was some hesitation at first. Kalashnikov had no formal education in weapon design, but the recommendation letter from General Kropotkin carried weight, so the major could not refuse him. Kalashnikov was then introduced to Colonel Vasily Fedorovich, who would be responsible for supplying everything he needed to build his rifle. As they walked to his workspace, Kalashnikov learned that many of the participants there were already accomplished inventors, and he was surprised to find himself competing alongside figures like Georgy Semyonovich Shpagin, the creator of the PPSH submachine gun. When Colonel Vasily asked for the rifle's design sketches, Kalashnikov couldn't provide them because previously the workers at Pavel's factory had helped shape the parts without formal drawings. Fortunately, Colonel Vasily understood the situation, and he immediately called for a designer named Ekaterina Moiseva to assist him.
Приятного аппетита. Вы Калашников? Екатерина Моисеева. Лёдя просил помочь вам с чертежами, но у меня одно условие. Не приставать.
Чего?
Надеюсь, мы друг друга поняли.
From that point on, Kalashnikov began to feel something for Ekaterina. Every now and then, he would find an excuse to look in on her while she worked. At first, he was awkward and unsure, But over time, the two of them grew closer. And a few days later, when the sketches for his rifle were finally finished, he gave her a small gift, a bit of sugar. Seeing her respond warmly, Kalashnikov tried to get to know her even more. He walked her home, and only then did he learn that Ekaterina was a widow with a child. Kalashnikov smiled because even so, he still felt there was a chance for them. They said goodbye, and Ekaterina wished him good luck for the competition results the next day. After a series of evaluations, the announcement was made, and unfortunately, Kalashnikov's rifle did not win. The winner was Alexei, but the bet he had made turned out to be just a joke, and Alexei encouraged him instead, telling him to keep improving his work for the next competition. Colonel Vasily did the same. He told Kalashnikov to return to Alma-Ata and develop an even better design. Before leaving, Kalashnikov looked once more toward Ekaterina, working at her desk, but he didn't get the chance to say goodbye. In 1944, Kalashnikov returned to Alma-Ata and went straight to meet General Kropotkin. The general looked disappointed, and he made it very clear that Kalashnikov had to win the next competition. With both encouragement and pressure weighing on him, Kalashnikov immediately began working on a new rifle design, staying up late night after night just to finish it. With the help of Ivanovich and the factory workers, the new design started to take shape. The production process went smoothly, and this time, Kalashnikov added several improvements that he believed would make the rifle far superior to his earlier model. And it proved true when they tested it. The new rifle showed noticeably better accuracy. One day, a captain from the National Security Service named Lobov arrived. He had been assigned by General Kropotkin to accompany Kalashnikov in transporting his rifle to Golutvin. While they were at the station, a man inside one of the train's holding cells called out and asked about Kalashnikov. To Kalashnikov's shock, the man was his older brother who had been imprisoned for opposing the government. Seeing him like that made Kalashnikov deeply saddened. But when Captain Lobov asked who the man was, Kalashnikov denied any relation. Lobov, however, became suspicious and assumed that Kalashnikov might actually be an anti-government dissident disguised as a weapons designer. Because of this, the two ended up in a brief fight, but Kalashnikov managed to overpower the captain and explain the truth. He had nothing to do with his brother's actions. He told Lobov that the last time he saw his brother was when they were children, and that he was actually grateful just to know that his brother was still alive. When they arrived in Golutvin, the thing that made Kalashnikov happiest was being able to see Katerina again. From then on, he spent most of his time with her. As days passed, their relationship grew closer, and eventually they became a couple. Meanwhile, Kalashnikov continued going through rounds of testing and evaluation for his rifle, day after day, until finally, the time came for the results to be announced. But the committee declared that none of the submitted rifles met the technical requirements.
По итогам конкурса комиссии принято следующее решение. Ни один из представленных образцов ручного пулемета не будет принят к производству по причине конструктивного несоответствия техническому заданию заказчика.
Everyone there was disappointed by the decision, but the committee still gave them another chance to develop new designs, since the war was not yet over. Feeling completely discouraged, Kalashnikov went to see a military doctor and begged to be cleared so he could return to the front. But rules were rules with his condition. He still wasn't allowed to fight. In the middle of his frustration, he ran into Colonel Vasily. Once again, Vasily encouraged him. He believed Kalashnikov still had more potential in him, and that he was capable of creating an even better design. Vasily also gave him another opportunity. Kalashnikov would be assigned his own department, so his next design could be developed more thoroughly with the help of the best people Vasily had personally selected. The only thing that eased Kalashnikov's disappointment was the time he spent with Ekaterina. And on that day, without either of them expecting it, Ekaterina's mother came to visit. They talked for a while, and at first, her mother didn't approve of their relationship. She was simply worried she didn't want her daughter to be abandoned again, the way it happened in the past. Hearing this, Kalashnikov stood up and, without hesitation, proposed to Ekaterina. He promised that he would always stay by her side. Then one day, soldiers suddenly began running through the building, shouting the news. The war was over. They all listened as Stalin's announcement was broadcast over the radio. The news became the happiest moment for every soldier there, including Kalashnikov. But at the same time, he was worried that the development of his rifle might be stopped, especially since he had just finished his newest prototype. To be certain, the next day, Kalashnikov went to his superior and asked about the future of the project. Fortunately, headquarters had decided to continue. In fact, they demanded that the designers create weapons that were even more advanced than before. Hearing that, Kalashnikov regained his motivation. In the days that followed, he and his team continued developing the design, working toward producing the best rifle possible. One day, Alexei came to visit and looked over the design Kalashnikov was working on. He was impressed by it, and he suggested simplifying the weapon's internal mechanism so it would be easier to use. In 1947, Kalashnikov traveled to Kovrov to begin the competition. There, he met a man named Zaitsev Alexander, who was assigned to be his assistant. The two of them then headed to the weapons factory to start building his rifle, using only the best materials available. This time, Kalashnikov and Alexander worked side by side, crafting every part of the rifle with precise calculation. They also simplified the internal mechanism, just like Alexei had suggested earlier. Every night, Kalashnikov could think of nothing else but the rifle. He wanted this new model to perform flawlessly in every environment. Days went by, and finally the rifle was completed. On the same day, Kalashnikov went to his superior and requested permission to run the field test. But unfortunately, the testing range was already booked for that day and the next one, so he was told he needed to wait. Kalashnikov, who was already anxious and eager, decided he couldn't wait any longer. He headed outside into the open field and fired the rifle at a sand-filled drum to test it himself.
Эй, придурок! Ты что делаешь? Немедленно прекратить огонь!
That act immediately drew the attention of nearby soldiers, and Kalashnikov was quickly detained for violating the testing rules by firing his weapon outside the designated range. Even so, he showed no sign of regret. In fact, he was thrilled to see that both firing modes of his rifle worked perfectly. Soon after, Kalashnikov was brought before General Degtyaryov, who happened to be one of his rivals in the competition. The general was impressed by Kalashnikov's dedication and asked to see his new weapon. Although hesitant at first, fearing that his design might be copied, Kalashnikov finally agreed and presented the rifle. To his surprise, after carefully examining the weapon, General Degtyaryov decided to withdraw from the competition altogether. He admitted that Kalashnikov's rifle showed greater potential than his own design, and openly praised the young man's natural talent, especially since Kalashnikov had never received formal education in weapons engineering. Finally, the long-awaited testing day arrived. Before accuracy trials began, each rifle was first submerged in water to test its endurance, then fired to measure precision. After that, the rifles were buried in sand and tested again to see whether their mechanism still functioned properly. All of the rifles had shown their weaknesses one by one, and now it was finally time to test Kalashnikov's design. The first test was to submerge the rifle in water, and when it was lifted and fired, it worked perfectly. Then came the second test, burying the rifle in sand, and once again, it fired without any failure at all. The only rifle that successfully passed every single test was the one designed by Kalashnikov. Once his weapon was officially approved, Kalashnikov returned to see Ekaterina, and that's when she told him she was pregnant. He was overjoyed. At that moment, it felt as if everything he had dreamed of was finally coming true. Moscow, 1949. His rifle was now being produced on a massive scale, and Kalashnikov himself had received an award from Stalin. One day, he was approached by a high-ranking officer, Comrade Marshall, who introduced him to the troops as the creator of the very rifle they now carried. The officer then granted Kalashnikov leave and encouraged him to return home to visit his mother. After so many years, Kalashnikov finally went back to his childhood home together with Ekaterina and their two daughters. That the rifle he created has been produced in more than 200 million copies, and that the AK-47 named after him, Avtomat Kalashnikova, went on to become one of the defining weapons of the 20th century.